Cybersecurity Endgame, Zero Trust. This is the fourth episode of our Beyond SASE SCAPE research series. I'm Johna Till Johnson, Nemertes CEO and founder. John Burke, Nemertes CTO, will be presenting today. We encourage you to submit any questions you have along the way. We'll save some time at the end for Q&A, and we'll answer as many questions as we can. And with that, John, the floor is yours. Let's go ahead and get started.
Thanks very much, Johna. And as Johna said, hello, everybody. Thank you. Today's episode is Cybersecurity Endgame, Zero Trust. And what we'll talk about after giving a little background on us, Nemertes, and on the study that drove the data we're presenting today, we'll set the stage for our discussion of Zero Trust by talking about the way folks are used to thinking about security, the enterprise in which they currently find themselves, and the way they should be thinking about security. And then we'll walk into some the transition courtesy of the research data that we're presenting. We'll wrap it up with some recommendations and take questions. Please, everybody, make sure, and if questions occur to you along the way, submit them when they occur to you using the question panel from Bright Talk here. Don't think you'll remember it at the end of the session, because folks never ask them at the end if they don't ask them right away when they occur. So for those of you who are not familiar with us, haven't been following the series so far, for shame, please go back and watch the other episodes after this one. We are a research and strategic advisory company, and we are focused on helping enterprises uncover the business value they can realize by deploying emerging technologies. So we're constantly collecting data from enterprises through interviews, through case studies, and through surveying to find out what they're doing by way of deploying new technologies, what roadblocks they run into when they do so, how they get around those things, and how successful they are in delivering value to the enterprise by whatever method that particular technology can deliver value. We have hard metrics for that kind of success that we define per study and correlate things against both technologies and practices. And of course, that will take us to the topic of Zero Trust today. The Secure Cloud Access and Policy Enforcement Research Study comprised data from 157 participating firms that can both interview and participation. We accepted from U.S. companies, a few over the border from Canada, so we have data from 2 countries and about 30 vertical industry average. The companies were medium, about 6,000 employees, 11 billion in revenue.
Hi, folks. And I see that John is having some small technical issues, not that that ever happens for technology folks. So I'll just go ahead and pick up and carry on. As John was saying, we had 157 participating firms in 2 countries across 31 vertical industries with a mean employee count of about 6,000 and a mean annual revenue of just a hair under 2 billion. As I know you were all hoping for John to sing about the way we were, but sadly he is not able to do that.
So. I'm back, my network's back, and trust me, nobody ever waits for me to sing.
That's what I was going to say. So since you are not going to sing the way we were, why don't you explain the legacy mindset inside, outside, us, and them?
And for other silverbacked IT folks like myself, we remember the very, very, very old days, even before the internet, and certainly before internet connections were common, when the question of security was very much a system-by-system question and not very much about people outside the company and them trying to get access to us. But with the advent of internet connectivity, the model emerged of us and them, with us being the folks who are on the inside. We're in the company network, whether it's a single site or multiple sites, and the people inside that network are to some extent trusted, not with absolutely everything, but they're trusted to be trying to access systems that they should be trying to access, and easily blocked from systems that they shouldn't be able to access. And anybody on the inside is to some extent trusted, and any system on the inside is to some extent trusted. And then there'd be that thin pipe out to the internet and a firewall astride it to protect us from them, which was everybody on the outside of the company who should not have any access to our systems on the inside, at least before the advent of the web. So the basic security paradigm of the internet age emerged very quickly, which was us on the inside, and things on the inside are trusted, and them on the outside, and things on the outside are untrusted. And this thinking and this basic model was replicated not just at the company level, but at the campus level, in data centers, and basically anything that doesn't fit that model is treated as a variation and an exception from this baseline. Us on the inside trusted, them on the outside untrusted. Now, what happened was about 20 years of progress and complication. And we got to here where everybody lives now, which is in a world where the enterprise provides IT services both from on-premises resources, but more now, the majority of them from off-premises in some kind of cloud service providing environment, whether it's IaaS and PaaS, whether it's APaaS, iPaaS, or some other variety of that, whether it's SaaS. Services are being delivered from everywhere, and they're being delivered to everywhere, because we're not only delivering our services to people who are in company-controlled facilities with a company-controlled private WAN connection, we're also delivering them to folks who are living in branches that are connected only via the internet, or who are, and of course this is the end of the COVID work surge, who are working from home or working from other remote locations. We're delivering them to people who are not in a fixed location. We're delivering them to mobile workers who maybe are mobile as a part of their work, and we're still delivering our IT services to them. And so what we've been doing is steadily driving the amount of traffic that we're generating out of that paradigm defining inside to inside kind of connection, where people on the inside connect to resources on the inside, and into this new paradigm of traffic flow. You know, everything's interconnected, and all those services that we're providing from outside the enterprise, we're driving traffic from the inside to those things on the outside. We're also providing access for all those remote and home workers to our inside resources. That's the outside to inside flows. And lastly, we're driving traffic from users on the outside through things like VPNs to resources on the outside in places like Amazon AWS or Google or Microsoft Azure. So the majority of WAN traffic now goes to the outside or comes from the outside, or both. And I should say now this has actually shifted even further to the outside, because this data that you're looking at right here, this is not from the current research study. This is from the research study previous to it, where we were tracking this kind of data, and it was right at the beginning of COVID, so right before the enormous surge in work from home. So these numbers have shifted dramatically, but the point is, even before that happened, the old paradigm was clearly no longer a good fit for what was going on. And to get yourself into a security paradigm that is in the right place for what's going on now and what's going to go on in the near and long-term future, You have to shift your mindset first. That, of course, is what a paradigm is. It is a mindset within which you hang up all the facts of the world that you're dealing with. And we're now in a world of delivering services from anywhere to people who may or may not be stationary, to resources that may or may not be stationary, and where there's this enormous intermingling. And there is no perimeter anymore, the way there was when the paradigm was laid down. There is no trusted inside because there is no perimeter. And now, just because we deem somebody trustworthy when they try and get access to a system initially, doesn't mean that we should continue to trust them afterwards when they try to access the next system. What we're saying is that we're living now in a world of no implicit trust. So there is no us, there is no trusted inside, there is no continuity of trust. And that is actually what people mean when they speak of zero trust. They mean no implicit trust. Every attempt to access a system needs to be granted permission at the time of access. And that means that there has to be a policy in place that explicitly grants that access to that entity, whether it's a user or another system, and that that access is dynamic. There is this idea of a trust map that's mapping entities trying to access things to things that they may or may not be allowed to access. And that map can be modified on the fly based on things that happen in the world, like a user being fired and therefore being disabled via the identity management system, or things that are happening in the world in a more technical and dynamic sense. Their computer, or they as a user, start doing things on the network that look suspicious or are not allowed, and they try to do too much of it, so it's clearly not a mistake. And so the behavioral threat analytics engine in your security infrastructure says, hey, shut down their access, isolate them until we sort this out. And any further attempts by them to communicate with any system will be shut down until the matter is sorted out and the flag is cleared, basically. So that's the idea behind zero trust, that at a very fine grain, you're saying what people can do in accessing your systems. You're blocking them from doing anything else, and you're making that mapping of user to permission dynamic in as close to real time as you can manage, so that you can maintain the security of your network even in the face of an ongoing attack. That's zero trust. What you're seeing before us, and what I've basically been walking through and describing, is the NIST architecture definition for a zero trust environment. And it's an architecture. It's not a product. And as we'll see, that there are generally lots of products that go into deploying one, although typically fewer than you might have had before you started down this road. So zero trust is still a fairly uncommon thing. We see 16% of the folks in the SCAPE research study saying that they are now deploying zero trust in their environment, but nearly twice as many say they're planning to begin deployment this year in 2021, and another 16% or so planning to begin deploying in 2022. The rest of those folks, the rest of the people in the study have either not considered it or are evaluating it or have rejected it, a very small number. Now, looking at the folks who are evaluating, who haven't yet deeply considered it, we pried apart some of what they're working through as they either think about it or talk about why they haven't started thinking about it yet, and why they're not deploying zero trust. And the biggest slice say that they just don't know enough about it to even decide whether to deploy it or reject it. And that is in addition to a smaller slice there that say they don't know where to start with it. So that implies that they'd be interested in starting if they had an idea of where. So that's an awareness and an education issue. But then there's this slice that's almost half, divided up into three groups of people who are themselves skeptical about it, but their senior management is saying, yes, we should be doing this. People who want to do it, but their senior management are skeptical of it, or people who are, along with their senior management, skeptical of deploying zero trust in their environment. And we pried apart that big, almost half of the pie of folks who are skeptical of it for whatever reason, and tried to get to the core of what those reasons were. And it basically broke down into three big camps. People who don't believe it can work, people who think it's really just marketing and not an actual solution or architecture, and the largest slice, over half, the majority, saying that the organization they're in is too complex for zero trust to work for them. And I have to say, when I was analyzing this data, that one actually made me laugh a bit, because of course, zero trust comes to us by way of the Department of Defense and the three-letter agencies and Google primarily. And if there was ever a more complicated set of organizations than those, I'm not sure what they are. So the idea that Joe Blow off the street at Joe Blow Con has too complicated an environment for zero trust to work in it was a little comic to me.
Yeah, and I would just weigh in on that, because actually one of the great values of zero trust, which sort of addresses two of those concerns, is that it actually streamlines and simplifies organizations. And in fact, it does deliver as promised within certain parameters. Obviously, there's not a magic wand solution. I wish there were. But I think if you're one of the people that's skeptical because you think your organization is too complex, you may want to take a second look at zero trust, particularly when it comes to building out the architecture, which we'll talk about shortly, and thinking about getting started with certain products, because there are other solutions that are significantly more complex that many organizations have already adopted, like NAC, that can either quickly accelerate your path to zero trust or become obviated by the move to zero trust. So if you're in that green slice, you may want to circle back and think again, is the moral of the story.
Absolutely. Think of it as an opportunity to simplify things using something that's built for complex situations. Folks largely began their zero trust journeys last year or this year. One thing that's worth noting is that the folks who are in our security success group, which, if you weren't around for the first webinar in the series or the previous one, episode 3, amounted to about 20% of the overall participant pool. Folks who are almost an order of magnitude better at avoiding serious security incidents than everybody else. They were more likely to have started their efforts in 2018 or 2017 or earlier. So obviously, the longer you've been in it, the more benefits you're reaping from it. And of course, the flip side of that is it's something that, as Johna says, there's no magic wand to wave over your infrastructure and architecture and processes. It's a multi-year process of conversion, migration, and renewal as you go through shifting to a zero trust model. Because remember, zero trust, it's an architecture and it's a frame of mind. So you're still going to need tools to make it happen, and you're still going to have to revamp architectures and processes to work in a zero trust way in a zero trust environment. So how to get started? That was really where we wanted to focus the data portion of this, the rest of the data portion of this. We laid out a whole heap of activities that are involved in making the shift from a legacy paradigm to a zero trust environment. And then we analyzed the data and looked at the difference between what that security success group, the folks who are best at preventing security incidents, what they do differently from everybody else. And the highlights are, first, they develop their zero trust architecture before anything else. Second, they start redesigning network, firewall, and data architectures. And third, so after they've spent a fair amount of time in architecting an environment, they then begin to put together the implementation team and acquire any new special purpose tools that they're going to need for this purpose, and to re-engineer applications, the endpoint architecture, and the policies. And graphically, it looks like this. And as you can see, there is that neat progression from first and foremost focusing on the zero trust architecture itself, and then all the other architectures that are going to be affected by it, and then by the implementation details. Now let's contrast that. I'm going to flip forward and then back. Let's contrast that with what everybody else is doing, and it's a pretty dramatic difference. Everybody else, so everybody else being all the folks outside that security group, approximately 80% of the participants in the research study, any of them who are doing zero trust, at the same time that they are working on the zero trust architecture, they are attempting to redo all their other architectures and create that implementation team, and overlapping that with acquisition of tools and beginning to re-engineer applications. So they've mushed together implementation and architecture dramatically. They've compressed those things into a much smaller amount of time, and overlapping entirely with each other, those activities. And we believe that that correlates with their level of success in security in the first place. And whether it's cause or effect, we're still talking through ourselves. We always have those debates, but it's certainly a strong correlation. So flipping back to what the successful folks are doing, the more successful folks are doing, I did also want to draw attention to one aspect that was a bit of a surprise for us, which is that folks are revising their policies late in the process. So phase 3 activity for the folks in the success group. Whereas, 2 years ago, if somebody had said, where should we begin in making a transition to zero trust, we would have said, well, start by laying out the policy framework you want to implement, and then work on the architecture, and then work on implementations. And this is reversed that relationship. And to some extent, it's sensible in that the goal of a zero trust architecture is to enable the enterprise to implement any policies that it needs to implement in order to control access to any resources it has control over. And that's enough of a definition of what's going to come in the way of policy to proceed with defining the zero trust architecture, confident that the details of policy can be resolved later.
And I'd like to just weigh in on that, because I think it's such an important point that it bears repeating in a different voice, which is what John said. We literally were advising clients to start with developing their policies and then move on to architecture. What the data shows us is that the most successful organizations start with architecture, use whatever they've got as a policy, and begin to build and revise it as they go, and really focus on it in the third phase. And that actually makes sense if you really think about it, because as much as you may think that the policy is the bedrock that you're building all this on, truthfully, the policy had better be something that can change and be revised as the organization grows and changes, and as business requirements grow and change. So it's got to be flexible and adaptable. What you want is an architecture that can instantiate a wide range of policies. So that's why you start with the architecture.
Okay, so wrapping up with the recommendations. First off, we definitely advise everybody to embrace zero trust as their go-forward approach to security. It's really the only approach that's going to be sustainable over time in this still rapidly evolving multi-cloud world that enterprises are building around themselves. And fully cognizant of the fact that they're going to hold 25 to 30% of their services in their in-house data center facilities, at least for the next 5 or 6 years. Zero Trust works beautifully in a hybrid environment in that sense, which means that they should then, after embracing Zero Trust, architect a Zero Trust environment for themselves before they begin re-architecting other specific technology silos in their environment, things like networks, firewalls, if they retain them, and how they are storing data. And then they need to do they also need to begin the introspection that goes with Zero Trust, because you can't do a granular trust map if you don't understand the relationships among systems and users. So you need to start understanding in much greater detail than you've forced yourself to in the past exactly who needs to have access to what, when. After that, work on tooling, work on building teams in the security and administration and network groups to handle the implementation and work on that implementation before you finally start exercising the system by doing granular trust mapping for users' access to systems that you're providing them. And lastly, or simultaneously with that last, bring that dynamic aspect into the environment by getting behavioral threat analytics up and running in your environment and connected into that policy control infrastructure, so that when something bad is happening and the behavioral threat analytics system spots it, it can control, it can change the level of access that people or other entities in the environment have to your systems based on that threatening behavior. And with that, I will hand it back to John.
Great, John. And I see we've got a couple questions that have come in. If folks have additional questions, please do weigh in. The first one I think is very interesting. Aside from developing an architecture, so somebody was listening, thank you, what are good first steps in launching Zero Trust?
Good first steps would be doing that introspection piece, using the tools you have available to you or getting new ones to understand the relationships amongst systems so that you have an idea of what kind of trust maps you're going to be laying down as you begin to build it out. And looking at, I would say the other good first step is to look at the user access side of it and providing that Zero Trust access component using software-defined perimeter or some other Zero Trust modeled access technology.
Yeah, and John mentioned SDP. I would strongly urge folks to assess SDP products and see how they fit, because the nice thing about SDP is it sort of solves two problems at once. As John mentioned, you can actually address issues like VPN replacement, like user access, like migration to cloud, all sorts of very interesting and very real products. And they also essentially are real world concrete implementations of Zero Trust. And John mentioned earlier, that Google was one of the developers of Zero Trust. Google spun off Beyond Corp, which actually sells its solution as an SDP product. So the closest thing you can get to Zero Trust in a box is SDP, a software-defined perimeter. You may or may not find these products of value, but it's certainly worth looking at them. So that would be probably a good first step. John, I think we actually answered the second question, which was really kind of how do I turn an architecture into a functioning solution? We kind of bled into that by jumping on to, the whole question of looking at products. But here's someone asking a really interesting question. How do you measure the quantitative benefits of Zero Trust? Like, it's great that architecturally it's the right thing to do, but how do you... Yeah, I'm making faces, but how do you really turn that into this is a good thing to do, and this is how it made our security stance better and made our organization better?
So you would look at different security metrics, and the two that we have been talking about in this context are the SIPI, the serious incident per incident ratio, again, if you didn't watch episode 1 of this webinar series, we spent that whole episode just talking about the SIPI. And that is a good measurement of how well your systems overall are preventing serious incidents from occurring. And if you've been having incidents around access privileges, access control, you should see them decrease in the wake of deploying zero trust in your environment, and you should see that SIPI count improve. The other one would be the mean total time to contain a security threat, the MTTC, and that's a more holistic measurement of security efficiency, or effectiveness, I should say, because it looks beyond whether a serious incident occurs or not, and says when one does, how quickly are you able to deal with it? How quickly are you able to stop it, close the hole, fix the problem, however you define it. And looking at the MTTC, you should also see that improve in the wake of zero trust being deployed, because a major benefit of zero trust is that it makes lateral movement inside an environment much more difficult. So compromise of one system should not make it enormously easier to compromise the next system in line. So that's one thing that should show a measurable improvement. And the other, of course, is that if you have gone whole hog in the zero trust environment and have that threat analytics engine up and running and dynamic feedback into the zero trust policy engine and its trust map, it should, at essentially detection and automation speeds, shut down the attack in progress and not require human activity, human study and understanding of the problem prior to that shutdown taking place. And that should greatly improve your MTTC. So 2 concrete things you can look at and measure.
And John, there's another good question that is sort of the same question but different, which is, what problems does zero trust solve? And the poster writes, secures against malware, data loss, reduces risk, enhances security, controls access. Sounds like every other vendor product in the market. So what is it you can solve by ZT that wasn't solved before, or is this just another version of NAC? And if I may, I'd like to jump in and answer this, because I think it's actually kind of a very key question.
By all means.
And then I'll hand back over to you. I think touching on NAC makes a lot of sense, because it is to NAC what servers are to VMware, or rather what VMware was to servers, to keep the analogy direct. So in other words, with VMware or virtual servers and virtual machines, you can actually spin stuff up quickly. You don't need the physical servers. And so you can reduce the configuration time from hours to minutes, or days or weeks to minutes, and you have an enormous amount of agility and control over your infrastructure, including whether to put it in the cloud or not. Similarly, zero trust lets you do all the NAC things that you could do, but absolutely decouples them from the physical network that NAC is tied to. NAC does a lot of its functions at the MAC layer. What zero trust does is say you can apply those same policies to Johna Johnson, whether she is logging into your network from Starbucks, from her home office, from her on-premise office, from John Burke's office, because that's where she's working today, or whatever, which actually solves the work from home or work from anywhere problem much, much better than existing solutions such as, say, SASE, because you are actually now able to log into resources regardless of where you are, and you don't have to different solution for people who are working from home and people who are working in the office, which is great considering the very high percentage of organizations that are now moving to work from anywhere or hybrid work from home for the foreseeable future. So essentially what it does is it virtualizes NAC and applies it across the entire network, with all the benefits that come with that. So that's the big problem that it solves. The problem being that there are different approaches to granting access depending on which network you're in, and there are arbitrary barriers. That's kind of the problem that gets solved. I don't know that I articulated that well, so I'll toss it over to you, John, to add any additional thoughts.
I think that was actually swell. I just wanted to throw in on the idea that this is the be-all and end-all, solve-all security problems solution. It's not. It won't prevent a user's computer from becoming infected with malware via a website. That's not what it's for. If they're allowed to go to the web at all, then they can still get an infected machine courtesy of an infected website. And the thing that solves that problem is not definitionally a part of zero trust. And it doesn't take the place of a secure web gateway. It doesn't deal with data leak prevention or data loss prevention. There are still going to be pieces of the security puzzle that are outside the ZT envelope functionally. They can share a policy definition potentially. They can provide information to the zero trust environment. They can be feeds into it, but ultimately the zero trust environment itself is not going to solve all the problems in the security space. What it is very sharply focused on is protecting the resources of the enterprise, whether they're on premises or in cloud, and providing very granular control over what gets to access those resources. To the extent that things are on premises and you can control network access to them that way, you can also protect from outside network probes peppering your laptops with security breach attempts. But like I say, if the laptop is doing something it's allowed to do, like browsing the web, zero trust environment's not going to protect it from catching a disease that way.
And along those lines, somebody is asking whether zero trust applies to workloads accessing each other as well as end users accessing a workload. And the answer is yes, the engine can be deployed. That is a anything involved, as John said, accessing an enterprise resource, whether it's a user accessing or a workload accessing, can be addressed via zero trust. So yes, that's actually one of the strengths of zero trust, is that you've got the ability to make these decisions on a user by user basis, a workload by workload basis, a service by service basis, a microservice by microservice basis. As long as the core problem is secure and authorized access to enterprise resources, zero trust can play. And I think that is it for the questions, John. Very well done. I think it was an excellent summary of our findings here and of zero trust generally. The last thing I would just add as we go to wrap up is, if you have more questions on how to implement zero trust or would like assistance in your zero trust initiatives, you know where we live. Give us a call. We're very happy to assist. We are working with several clients right now in enabling their zero trust initiatives. And last but not least, I want to make sure that you can see the registration links in your attachments tabs. We invite you to register for the upcoming episodes in this series. You can see a link to our website, which is a great way to reach us, as well as our LinkedIn profiles. So if you want to contact us after the fact, feel free to do it that way. And that's it. Thank you all for your time and great questions. This replay should be up on our channel shortly. If you found it valuable, please feel free to share it with your colleagues, and please take a moment to rate this webinar. It's much appreciated. If you haven't already, again, check out those links in your attachment tab. Thank you very much for joining us today, and we look forward to having you join us again soon. Thank you.